Hey, are you in there somewhere? How are you doing, girl? So nice to speak with you this morning. Today is the 28th of August, 2019, and I just feel immense gratitude for me being able to be in your presence today. And just so thankful that technology exists to bring us closer together. Um, so, the question for today is if if I could take an early retirement, what would I do? So this is a really difficult question for me, and I've touched on in the past why that is, and it's because I have a really strong work ethic. I have a really strong sense that work is valuable and important, and th- I think to some extent, a human being's work is his life to some extent. That there's something profoundly virtuous about work. And you know what? What's interesting is that I think the distinction might be the difference between working where other people give you work and working where you give yourself work to do. So, that might be more a more apt distinction. So here's the thing. I would lean toward not taking an early retirement. I mean, I'm all for taking vacation time, which is wonderful. But see, what happens is that, and this is my understanding, it's that our brain is very adaptive. Our brain adapts to its environment, and what we what kind of the things that we do, we just adapt to. Our happiness levels adapt to it. It almost doesn't matter what we do. I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't matter what we do, our brain will find some way to adapt to the new context. And that'll be the new normal. Here's an example. There are people who win $1 million at the lottery. And, you know, before they win the lottery, they're about, probably happiness level of an 8. I mean, just after they've won the lottery, of course, they're at a happiness level of a 9 or a 10, which is wonderful. But give the brain about a year to adapt to the new environment. And my belief is that their happiness level will return to an 8. Yeah, despite them having hundreds of thousands of dollars more money. And the same is true for people who get injured in serious accidents. Say they become a quadriplegic in a skiing accident. Well, let's say before they became a quadriplegic, they were at a level 8 of happiness. Maybe immediately after they became a quadriplegic, they would be so sad about the losses that they've experienced that they might be really in the doldrums. Maybe a 2 or a 3 or 4 in terms of happiness level. But give that brain a few months, maybe even a year or two to adapt to its new environment. And my belief is that the brain will return this person's life to a happiness level of 8. So I really am quite a believer in this idea of a thermostat where our brain sort of works toward achieving a certain homeostasis in terms of the emotions that are produced. And a lot of it has to do with narrative and changing the story. And our brain is really adept at doing that, changing meaning. And so I think that however your life changes, whether you get a new mate, a romantic partner, whether you lose a romantic partner, whether you get a new child or lose a child, that, you know, your behavior is informed by all these happenings, all these events, of course. You're learning new things. But when it comes to um, your overall level of happiness, I think it doesn't change much over time unless you really go to work on developing and improving your narrative, developing, improving your sort of your energetic vibe, the emotions that you sort of emote. Um, so unless you go to work on yourself, on your inner self, things are not going to change that much. I mean, we'll run into speed bumps, but we'll return to normalcy pretty quickly. And when I say pretty quickly, I mean 6 months to a year. So, so now comes this question of retirement. Now, if I had an early retirement, what would I do? Well, here's the thing about retirement, quite often for a lot of people, is that a lot of people become more vulnerable. They become more financially vulnerable, right? They are subject to the whims of, say, their government pension check, or, their government social security check, or their pension check if they have a retirement. Um, there's something about becoming a little bit more powerless, sort of. And you know what? Maybe for some people it's wonderful that they've done that. In a way, for them, it's like a surrender. And I can see how that can be useful and interesting and even transformative. And I can also see how retiring can really help you get in touch with what it is you truly want to do. Now you've got all day long to decide what, and you need to decide what to do with yourself, right? I can see that could be a really great way to mine the sort of the inner sanctums of your mind for habits and interests, and help you individuate, right? Do a better job of individuating, because there are a lot of things in the world today that prevent people from individuating. Stress, circumstance, relationships prevent people from individuating. The people get stuck in ruts, right? And so there's less individual uniqueness. You can't explore individual uniqueness, your individuality, if you're constrained to, say, working 80 hours a week, right? And so you can't explore what it is that makes you uniquely you. And that's a problem. So I can see how retirement sort of provides this promise that you can individuate, and you could do a better job of individuating. And that's very satisfaction. That brings a lot of satisfaction, because you find it out what it is you love to do, what your passions are, and you're able to pursue those passions. You're able to follow your bliss. And what could be more wonderful than that? Okay, so I guess I've kind of made the case for retirement. But at the same time, I think you might have noticed in my descriptions, I'm sort of hedging myself a little bit, in the sense that I suspect that today you can get all of those benefits and still work and still not give away your power. Yeah. What I love about working people is that they're financially powerful, that they can make decisions, and even if they're bad decisions, they can recover in short order if they're intelligent, because they've got income coming in, and that income's variable. And so what I'm saying is that I think it's possible to individuate and to be powerful at the same time. Yeah. It's not a choice. It's not either be powerful or individuate. You can be powerful and individuate at the same time. I think you can be powerful as a worker, as a person who is employed, and be transformed. And I don't think transformation is something that happens outside of work. I think transformation can happen hand in hand with being in work. And this individuation I talk about, where you've got the freedom to decide what to do with your time. I recognize that there are constraints in the working world related to that. And I'm also recognizing that individuation is actually quite a subtle thing. And it doesn't, in order to individuate and to do it effectively and completely, I don't think you necessarily have to be free from all constraint. Yeah. Yeah. I think you can individuate and have some constraints. It's in a way, it's like an artist. Um, in a way, there's almost two kind. I'm sort of imagining this dichotomy where there are two kinds of artists, right? There's the artist that confines themselves to a what's that wooden structure with fabric on it, textile fabric that people paint on. You would think I could come up with this. It's not an easel. No. It's a what is it called? It's well, let's just call it paper. Okay. So um so imagine two kinds of artists. There's one who relegates his entire his art career to drawing on paper or painting on paper. And then there's another artist who doesn't limit himself to paper. This is a person who, let's say, writes on anything and everything. They do tagging on the streets, they tag on buildings, they tag on fences. And I guess here's my argument here. I think that a person can individuate and develop both on paper, if they're limited or constrained to paper only, and if they're not using paper at all. I think to some extent, the adventure, the excitement, can be. I think you could capture similar experiences. I think it's really kind of possible. Now, it's true they won't be identical, but I think there can be a truly happy paper painter and a truly happy um, graffiti artist, and both in their modes of painting. Now, graffiti, and imagine that the graffiti artist might have access to paper too, and might occasionally decide to work on paper. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. The individuation would be different for both, but I also think that the pleasure and the enjoyment doesn't have to be different. I mean, the graffiti artist, I don't know. Must I argue that the graffiti artist can be is more happy because of the variety in painting surfaces that person has to enjoy? Is the graffiti artist necessarily happier than the portrait artist who always works with uh, on with paper? I don't think so. Yeah. So my argument is that it doesn't make a difference, constrained or unconstrained, so long as it's moderate constraint, right? Moderate constraint. If it's tightly constrained, that's a problem. For example, if the painter can only paint in 3 colors, blue, yellow, and red, that's, and maybe they can only paint on canvases. That's the word I was searching for. Canvases that were, say, 3 inches by 4 inches. That's some serious constraint. I think even despite the serious constraint, I think there can still be some individuation take place. Still be some transformation. And I think there still can be passion with the constrained artist and the unconstrained artist. Some artists choose a certain media and they stick with it their entire lives. Yeah. And here's the thing. Life is so varied. Human life is so varied. There's so many infinite possibilities about how one can express themselves that, I don't know. The constraint of work, I don't think is that strong. Now, it may be true that the person who works may never have a year-long vacation, free from work. And yeah, I can see how that can be a problem. Though, I'm not sure that it would necessarily have to impact their levels of transformation, their levels of personal growth, their levels of happiness. I don't think it necessarily has to do that because there's plenty to learn. Let me tell you, there's plenty to learn in the constrained state. In the constrained state. In fact, I would say that there's so much to learn that nobody ever learns, even in the constrained state, the happiness and joy that's possible to them in the constrained state during their lifespan. And I'm not certain that people who are unconstrained necessarily live happier lives. Absolutely. I don't think that people who are unconstrained necessarily have more transformation in their lives, necessarily have more personal growth in their lives. Yeah. Yeah. In a way, there's like this myth out there that being unconstrained is better than being constrained. But I'm not certain that that is even true. That is old fashioned thinking. Those are old fashioned values. And, there are, it's almost like believing that quadriplegics could never be happier than a person who had arms and legs. Who would even think that for a moment? I mean, I think a thinking person wouldn't be able to make that statement. There are plenty of people who have all their arms and legs and are depressed. There are plenty of people who have arms and legs and commit suicide. Plenty of people. In fact, that would be actually kind of an interesting statistic to check out. That is, checking the suicide rates between quadriplegics and people with all four limbs, and just comparing the percentages. What's the frequency of suicide? That would be quite it might be eye-opening. My guess is that either the suicide rates are about the same, or perhaps that the fully abled people have a higher suicide rate than the quadriplegics. Why would I guess that? I don't have to go down that path, but I guess my argument is that I wouldn't necessarily think that a person who only had one leg would be any less happier necessarily than a person who had two. Sometimes constraint can be helpful and useful and can be better than living without restriction. Living without restriction isn't always better. Here's an example. Obesity is a really great example for this. There are people who just eat whatever they want, anytime they want, anywhere they want, as much as they want. And you would think that that would make them so much happier. And you know what? In some ways, I think they might be happier. But overall, people who eat anything they want, whenever they want, however they want, I have read scientific studies that say that obese people have their taste sensations are dulled compared to non-obese. Hey, there are clinical studies that are showing this stuff. So I think it is questionable about whether, say, a person who's unconstrained as it relates to food is more happy than a person who's constrained as it relates to the food that they eat. I know that when I was obese, I was not happy, even though I was unconstrained. Today, I'm not obese, clearly not obese. And I'm much more happy. And my food is constrained. I constrain my food intake. And I'm much more happy. I'm like 2, 3, 4 times happier in my food environment as a constrained eater than when I was unconstrained. When I was unconstrained, I couldn't get any satisfaction. In my constrained state, I am learning to enjoy the foods that I eat in greater measure. I'm learning to really enjoy the strawberries that I eat because I know that I can have only so many. In fact, this also has to do with ideas related to mortality. Here's the facts. You and I, Emily, I probably won't live longer than 100 years. And you may live a little longer than 100 years. But 100 years is probably about as long as we're both going to live. Now, our lifespans are constrained. That's the point I'm making. And so I guess the question is, does this constraint make things worse or better? Does the constraint make me less or more happy? Does the constraint make me less grateful or more grateful for what I have? And I think that one can argue, it's very arguable, but I think that one can argue that the constraint makes you value your life more. It makes you honor your life and the life of others more. The constraint, the limitation on our ultimate lifespan, I think can help people become more grateful and more thankful for every minute that they're alive. Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason that question of, if you could live forever, would you choose to live forever, shows up so often. Now, of course, I think this is a question that came up just yesterday. We were talking about it. And I immediately said, yes, I would love to live forever. And now what's kind of funny is I'm arguing the opposite. I'm arguing that leading a constrained life may be just as happiness producing than living an unconstrained life. Wow. Who knew that I would be arguing the very opposite case the very next day? Oh my gosh. This just proves the subjective nature of reality and perception. Fact is, at base, there is no objective measure. And, that's one of the great things about the universe that we live in. There is no objective measure. It is completely slippery. When people identify values that they say are fundamental and enduring and objective, they are totally incorrect, which is so funny. I love the existential nature of the universe. Thank goodness for existentialism. Existentialism is the philosophy, that's actually quite sophisticated and detailed, but there's a lot in existentialism. But part of what existentialism says is that you define your own life, meaning, and purpose. That it's just a choiceful process, and that meaning is not something that's sort of bestowed upon you from some higher power. And so it means you choose your values. You choose. That's the thing about life, is that you are choosing every moment, every thought you think, every behavior you make. And, we all have this amazing, incredible freedom to choose, and we do it all the time, often inadvertently. So yeah, I'm loving this. And of course, the basis of that idea is that the universe is value free. It's just value free. Behavior is behavior, and there's no intrinsic meaning to it. There's no essentialism, right? And so anyway, that's pretty fascinating. It's funny how everything just, thank goodness for existentialism and the fact that it exists. And I'm so sad that there are a lot of people who are somewhat unfamiliar with that theory, because that philosophical position, or this philosophical stance, because it's been so enlightening and enriching in my life. It's also quite comforting to some extent to know that there are no objective values out there. There's no objective value giver. Yeah. So, what that means is the very fact, in fact, that freedom itself is total freedom. The very fact that the universe is value neutral is as much freedom as you need to recognize that it doesn't matter whether you live with constraint or not. That's right. In fact, there's a lot of myths related to happiness out there. According to some people, how they believe, wealth creates happiness, then Oprah Winfrey would be like the happiest person on the planet. And I actually don't believe that Oprah Winfrey is the happiest person on the planet unless she's done her work. Now, I can't vouch for whether she's done her work or not. I don't know her that well. She's certainly in a position to do a lot of work, even more work than me, and more work than many other people. I think Oprah is happier than a lot of people, but I don't think that necessarily she's as happy in proportion to her wealth. I'm not sure that wealth is necessarily that telling when it comes to a person's happiness. And I think there have been studies that suggest that so long as you're not completely poverty stricken, and that the people who are around you in your community have about the same amount of money that you have, so that you're not stricken with envy or jealousy, then the happiness level you have is something it's something that you choose. Yeah, and not something that's sort of necessary. So I guess that's pretty amazing. So I guess what I'm saying is, to answer the question, what I love about my videos is that I could go through an entire video examining the question from every angle and not answer it. I do that all the time. So the question is, if you could take an early retirement, what would you do? And I guess my true answer to the question is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I would do. It's not an important question. Whether a person retires or not is not an important question. And I think it's funny. It's sort of like, if you could eat a hot dog every morning for a week, would you do it? It's like, would it make you happier? Would it bring, it's kind of like a random question. If you could collect any rock in the world, would you do it? I think it's a malformed question. First of all, I don't like the question necessarily, but the implication behind the question is that there are certain behaviors that necessarily make you more happy than other behaviors. And I think that, just when it comes to sort of your profession or things like that, I don't think that it doesn't necessarily make you happier or less happier. I don't think that dentists are happier than surgeons. I don't think that dermatologists are happier than estheticians. In a way, it's a really old, I don't think that janitors are happier than engineers, or engineers are happier than janitors. I don't think retired people are happier than non-retired people. In fact, I guess that's really what the question is suggesting. It's suggesting that retired people are more happy than non-retired people. And I think that that's a myth, and I want to debunk that myth. It's like saying a person with a car is happier than a person without a car. Or a person, oh, here's one, that a person in jail is happier than a person out of jail. I'd be interested to know what the suicide rates between people who are jailed are compared to people who are not jailed. I have a sneaking suspicion that the suicide rates for people who are not jailed are higher than people who are jailed. So I guess what I'm saying is your happiness level does not depend on your life circumstance. Now, I really believe that. I really believe that your happiness level does not depend on your life circumstance. So that is the ultimate question. So, in other words, can I be happier than a millionaire? Of course I can. My happiness level does not depend on my external circumstance. In fact, really, I think Abraham Lincoln got it right in that, people are just about as happy as they decide to be. Is that Abraham Lincoln or is that Mark Twain? I don't know. They're both brilliant people, so either one of them could have said that. So yeah. So Emily, I would like you to know. I would like this to be some relief for you. And the relief is this. I know that a lot of people, since you're in high school, that a lot of people might be asking you, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And in fact, that question might be even more poignant now as a sophomore in high school, because I'm sure you're thinking about going to college and what subjects you'll want to choose. And I have a feeling that's a bothersome thought, right? Making this big decision. But my suggestion to you is that you actively try to minimize the importance of the decision. I don't think it's important. I think whatever has your fancy in the moment, I think you should pursue that. If you happen to be interested in math at the moment or interested in art or drama, I think that you should pursue it. Whether or not you think it'll bring you long-term happiness, because here's the thing, your long-term happiness doesn't depend on your profession. Not necessarily. Now, there are some professions which are kind of rough. But then again, there are personalities that thrive in those professions as well. I mean, I know happy psychotherapists and I know sad psychotherapists. I know happy doctors and I know sad doctors. I know happy lawyers and I know sad lawyers. I know happy engineers and I know sad engineers. And to some extent, it's not necessarily profession dependent, but I'm sure there are trends. So pay attention to those trends, because there are some professions which are particularly challenging, and if your personality doesn't move in that direction, if your personality has certain tendencies and predilections that are not aligned with that profession, definitely get out of it. And no profession is perfect. But then also having a non-profession or not working at all, that also is a state that's not perfect. I'm sure there are plenty of people who don't have jobs and who are miserable. And I would guess that people who don't have jobs are slightly more miserable, have a chance to be slightly more miserable than people who do. And here's why. Here's why I say that. That's actually quite a bold statement, and it may appear to be contradictory, but here's why I'm saying it. I believe that movement and activity and flow are important parts of being happy. And just getting a person up off the couch can help a person go a long way toward becoming more happy. Just getting out the door, just removing yourself from inside of a room and getting yourself outdoors to do what doesn't matter. But getting yourself moving and active and walking around, that goes a long way toward helping a person be happier. And whether they're going to work or not, yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter really. They just need to get out the door. They need to stop sitting in front of a television screen, stop watching movies, stop playing video games, and leave the house, leave the room. There's something about physical activity, and the brain. The brain loves physical activity. It craves it. It needs it. It may not be apparent to people who spend a lot of time indoors, but if you pay real close attention, I think bodies happen to thrive in movement. Bodies want to be worked. They need to be worked. Muscles are a very active tissue in the human body. They're continuously reforming, reshaping themselves. And muscles need activity. They need daily activity, frequent activity. And being active is a great way to reduce feelings of negativity and hopelessness and sadness and even fear and depression. So, yeah. So in a way, I might be an advocate for work just because it gets people off the couch. And you know what? In a way, I think that's true. That I think there are, sometimes I hear these stories of people who are retired where they're telling themselves that there's no reason to get up because they're retired, and they end up sleeping all day, or they end up not leaving their house all day long, or they stay in their pajamas all day long. These behaviors are inherently dysthemic. Now, the word dysthemic to me means depression producing, or sadness producing, or poor mood producing. There's something inherently dysthemic about inactivity. There's something inherently dysthemic about sitting down, lying down for long periods of time. And my suggestion is that a person who does that, who engages in inactivity, is just asking for serious problems and challenges down the road. Whether it's depression, sadness, anger, who knows? The human mind, the human brain, and the human body, they need activity. Inactivity is inherently dysthemic. And what the state that a person wants to seek and search for is that of flow, where there is continual challenge. And in that flow, there is, say, a 50% chance of success. Success isn't certain, so that one's attention can be riveted to the subject area. What's going on in the moment. It's about paying attention. It's about being mindful, living a life with an active mind and an active body. So I guess that's really, maybe this argument has more to do, this conversation about whether or not a person ought to take early retirement has to do with whether they plan to be active or not. What's the ratio of activity to inactivity in their lives? Here's one thing I really love about work, and that is that it creates social cohesion, right? In my mind, there's this, for people who are working, there is this vision of people working as a team toward a common goal. There is camaraderie there. There is belonging there in the midst of all that's happening. There are people who are pursuing values, or achieving goals, or accomplishing tasks according to deadlines. This kind of thing creates creates opportunities for recognition, opportunities for celebration, right? That's what's so wonderful about work. Believe it or not, half of what goes on at work is celebration. It's partying. There's the work that happens, and then there's the partying about the work that happened. And it's very subtle. It happens in meetings as people go around the table talking about their accomplishments or what they're working on or what their problems are. That is a transformation process in front of our eyes, but it's so subtle that people are not even recognizing it. The fact that deadlines are created and met, there is satisfaction in that. There is accomplishment in that. There is growth and development. It's not always clear when a deadline is established how to meet the deadline. A plan has to be written down or discussed and agreed upon. Progress has to be made. Action, directed action. People, as they become better and better, as they work longer and longer, maybe they become better and better problem solvers. Problem solvers not only in their personal lives, but in their work lives, or not only in their work lives, but in their personal lives as well. There are a lot of lessons that I take from the workplace and apply them to my personal life. And this is an important process. This also is individuation. This also is growth. And the fact that there are some constraints on it, I think, is not critical. That is, I've got to be at work at a certain time, at a certain place. Those are constraints. But the nature of work has really changed over the years, Em. Work 100 or 200 years ago used to be a drudgery. It used to be all about logistics, getting objects from point A to point B. So there was a lot of heavy lifting. There was a lot of physical labor. Today, most of the heavy lifting is performed by machines. So the nature of work has completely changed. And work is even changing more and more every day. It's becoming more liberating to work. A lot of workers today are knowledge workers. That means that they do a lot of abstraction, or there's a lot of creative work. Knowledge work is about sorting and making distinctions. It's about communicating. It's about teaching. It's about learning. Today, we've got knowledge workers mostly. And it's not to say that there isn't physical labor, but a lot of the physical labor problems have been managed by the use of machines, even simple machines like dollies and cranes and tools. There are a lot of tools that exist that make any job today a lot easier than it was to perform 20 years ago. And so the physical element of working is becoming less and less prominent. There are fewer people today who have to stand on their feet for 8 hours a day. And that's not to say that people don't stand on their feet for 8 hours a day. But there are a lot of jobs where it's not necessary to stand on your feet for 8 hours a day. And there are also management solutions, not just physical tools or robots, but there are management solutions that exist these days that help take the load off people's physiology. And there's also a wider recognition of occupational hazards which relate to keeping the body healthy, ergonomics. And we've gained a lot of information about ergonomics, and we're only getting better. And so, these limitations of the working world are slowly being eradicated. And so what I'm talking about is that there is less constraint now. A lot of people are teleworking. A lot of people are working at a distance from their workplace. And so They are working every day, but they aren't constrained by location. And we're also not constrained by time necessarily, because for many, they can do work at any time of the day or night. They can also be contacted at any time of the day. They can also be contacted at any time of the day. And, the nature of work is really changing. And so the importance of retirement is diminishing, it's reducing. Um, yeah. And I think for many people, it used to be like this sort of like this parachute where, they'll say sayonara to the working world, and and they'll jettison themselves to a place that's ultimately better. I think that vision probably was true 50 years ago. Very true. But today, I don't think of that as being really the case, because I see a lot of retired people who are isolated, disconnected from society. The fact is, work is connecting. Work gives you a purpose. It gives you sort of a reason to call up someone else because you're asking them a question because you have a goal to achieve. Work is a very connecting activity. Work is a very social activity. It's about being socially connected to a tribe. In a way, it is a tribe. And I know many, many seniors who are completely disconnected from other people. So not only are they more financially powerless, but they're also disconnected from society. In fact, that's a really big part of the reason that I'm not interested in retirement. It's because I really value human interaction. When I go to work, I'm hanging out with 60 other people doing the same thing that I'm doing. It's a social activity. It's like going to a party. As a retired person, I'm basically sitting in my room trying to imagine a reason to leave it. And boy, I certainly hope I come up with one, or else, because if I don't, I'm stuck at home watching TV all day. My attention being directed by advertisements, and who knows what I'm influenced by. So, yeah. I think being retired is, I think there are a lot of people who thrive in retirement. And I actually think that I could thrive in retirement pretty well. But one thing that I like about work is that it brings social cohesion, because relationships happen to be really important to me. And I really appreciate the social cohesion aspect of it, the social glue, you know. And it's almost like um, I guess I had a point that I was going to raise. I was going to It's sort of like an allegory. I guess I was going to suggest that work is like a game. Work is like a game that we choose to play. It's sort of like dancing. Yeah, dancing is a lot of work, right? When you choose a partner, it's, you know, that takes some courage. And it takes time and effort to learn the technique, the steps, how to focus on. And, there's something really constraining about dance. Dance is highly technical. Let's say a waltz or a salsa. The rules of the game are you're going to move in a certain way to the rhythm of the music. And you're going to move this way and only this way, right? Traditional structured dance. And you might think that being constrained, so tightly constrained, is a problem. Oh boy, look at those dancers. They're so constrained by the music. They've got all these rules, right? But I don't think it's necessarily better not to dance. I look at the happiness level. and I look at the happiness level and I compare the difference between a person who's dancing and a person who's not dancing, right? The wallflower. That's just observing the dancing that's happening from across the room. He's leaning against the wall. So it's true that the dancer is constrained. And it's true that the person who's observing the dancer, the wallflower, is unconstrained. I mean, though I would argue that the dancer who's constrained to dance in a particular way to the rhythm of the music is happier than the person who's not dancing. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good example of, say, a person who's free being less happy than a person who's not free. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for sharing this time with me. Thanks for watching me as I move through the various arguments related to whether it makes sense to retire or not. I think I approached the question from a few different angles, and I came to the conclusion that I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to retire early unless you have a plan that will create more individuation and more activity and more social connection. Unless you have a plan like that, it's probably better for you to continue to work. Oh, and also you have to have a plan about maintaining your financial power. Because here's the facts. Inflation exists. It's real. And if you've got a fixed income, every year you're losing 2%, 3%, 4% of the value of that income. And if you do that every year for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, oh man, that is constraint. Yeah, that's financial constraint that a person who's working doesn't have to worry about. A person who's working, they're continuously getting raises because they're becoming more valuable in the workplace, they're gaining experience. And that value is translating into, maintaining sort of parity with all the other workers who are working alongside them. You're on the cutting edge of technology and training and, I don't know. I think it's better. You're more financially powerful as a worker, and you also have the opportunity to be transformed, to be individuated, partly because the nature of work has changed. It's become a lot more favorable to the worker. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think that I would retire. Being in a retired state is just too tenuous. Even if I had like $1 billion, well, I'm pretty sure if I had $1 billion that I could find ways to use my time. And I don't think work probably would be that useful to me because I could grow and individuate at a faster pace without work. I'm pretty sure I could also grow and individuate in ways that were important to me. Subtly more important to me if I had, say, $1 billion, but that's not necessarily true. I'm sure there are plenty of suicidal billionaires out there. I have a feeling that there might be one or two. So, Emily, I just want to say that thank you very much for being with me during this conversation. I appreciate the presence that you offer by being there, observing me from a distance. And, I just want to say how much I appreciate you. Thank you for your time and for your energy. Thank you for everything that you've done for me, for the care that you've extended my way. I know I know despite the fact that we're not together a lot, I know that you care for me very much and that you want me to be happy and enjoy my life. And I have that deep sense that that is true. And I know that in many ways that you care for me in subtle ways that you may not even pick up. I think even now, despite our distance and our separation, that you are taking action on my behalf to help me and to help me feel more secure. And I really appreciate those actions. And even though I may not know about them directly, I can guess that they exist and that they're real, and that um, I want you to know that I'm really hopeful and optimistic about the future. Here's the thing: life is a marathon, and as you grow and mature and become an amazing young adult, I have a feeling that we're only going to grow closer. Because I think it would be almost impossible for us to grow further away. Oh yeah. So there's only one way. There's only one way is up. So that's partly why I'm so optimistic about the future. And I think things are going to really come together soon. I'm not sure when or how or why, but I do want you to know that there is a father out there who loves you, and there is a family out there who is dedicated to you and who knows about you, who's aware of you, and who loves you. A family filled with aunts and uncles and cousins and parents and grandparents. They're out there. They're out there. And they're waiting for you to seek them out, or at least to be open to you acknowledging their presence. They're definitely out there. So I want to encourage you to, take care of yourself first. And once you've done that, you're welcome to reach out to us. And, if you're willing to receive the love that we have to offer. I love you. Bye-bye, girl.